The year was 1992. 1 month before Unforgiven was scheduled to release, Roger Thornton, the most influential film critic in America, published a piece in the Los Angeles Times titled Eastwood's Eulogy, a Western star riding into irrelevance. The article was devastating. It called Clint Eastwood a relic, a man trading on past glory, someone who should have retired years ago. The piece was shared everywhere. Industry insiders nodded in agreement. The studio considered pulling advertising. But Clint Eastwood read the article, folded the newspaper, and said nothing. He didn't respond. He didn't defend himself. He simply waited. 2 weeks later, the opening weekend numbers came in, and Roger Thornton's career as a serious critic effectively ended that same night. Roger Thornton had been reviewing films for 23 years. His opinion could make or break a movie. Studios feared him. Directors courted him. When Thornton praised a film, audiences noticed. When he condemned one, theaters sat empty. He wrote his review of Unforgiven without having seen it. This wasn't unusual. Thornton had developed a formula over the years. He would study the trailer, read the production notes, assess the market conditions, and draw conclusions that were almost always confirmed when he eventually watched the actual film. For Unforgiven, his conclusion was devastating. Clint Eastwood is a man desperately clinging to relevance in an industry that has passed him by, Thornton wrote. This film, a self-serious Western from a director whose best work is decades behind him, represents the final gasping breath of a career that should have ended gracefully long ago, each one more damning than the last. The Western genre is dead. Eastwood's appeal to younger audiences is non-existent. His insistence on directing his own films has produced a string of forgettable efforts that critics have kindly ignored out of respect for his past contributions. The conclusion was brutal. With Unforgiven, Clint Eastwood has written his own eulogy. Hollywood would do him a kindness by not publishing the obituary too loudly. The article landed like a bomb. Entertainment shows discussed it. Other critics weighed in, many agreeing with Thornton's assessment. Industry analysts wondered if Warner Brothers should cut their losses, reduce the marketing budget, and let the film die quietly. Clint Eastwood's publicist called immediately. "We need to respond. We need to fight back. This is going to destroy the film's opening." Clint was at his ranch in Carmel reading the morning paper with his coffee. "Did you read it?" the publicist demanded. "I read it. And what? We don't have to do anything. Clint, this is Roger Thornton. His opinion matters. People listen to him because he's loud. That doesn't mean he's right. But the damage? There is no damage," he wrote words. "Words don't change what the film is. They change how people perceive it before they see it. Then we'll change how they perceive it after they see it." Clint set down his coffee. The film speaks for itself. Either it's good enough to overcome bad press, or it isn't. If it isn't, then nothing I say in response will matter. If it is, then his article just becomes evidence of how wrong experts can be. You're not going to respond at all? I'm going to finish my coffee. Then I'm going to go for a ride. Then I'm going to wait. Wait for what? The opening weekend. The weeks leading up to release were tense. Warner Brothers executives held emergency meetings. Market research showed that Thornton's article had penetrated public consciousness. Focus groups mentioned that review as a reason for skepticism about the film. The studio's marketing team proposed aggressive countermeasures. We bring in other critics who have seen the film. We generate positive buzz. We attack Thornton's credibility. The head of distribution disagreed. Attacking a critic looks desperate. It confirms their narrative. So we do nothing. We do what Eastwood is doing. We wait. Eastwood isn't running a studio. He can afford to be philosophical. We have shareholders. The debate continued for hours. Eventually, a compromise was reached. They would maintain the current marketing campaign without changes, neither attacking Thornton nor retreating from their original strategy. But privately, many executives had already written off the film. Another Eastwood Western that would underperform. Another example of a fading star failing to read the room. Another project that would have been better left unmade. 2 weeks before wide release, Unforgiven had its first industry screening. The theater was packed with critics, journalists, and studio personnel. Roger Thornton was not present. He had already published his assessment and saw no reason to revise it. The lights went down. The film began. For 2 hours and 10 minutes, the audience watched something they hadn't expected. It wasn't the nostalgic Western that Thornton had predicted. It wasn't Eastwood recycling his old image for one last payday. It was something else entirely. A meditation on violence, on aging, on the weight of past sins. It was dark. It was complex. It was devastating. When the final scene played out, when William Money rode away into the rain, having become the very monster he had tried to escape, the theater was completely silent. No one moved. No one spoke. The credits rolled in absolute stillness. Then, slowly, someone started to clap. Within seconds, the entire theater had joined in. Not the polite applause of obligation, but the sustained ovation of genuine appreciation. The critics who had read Thornton's article and expected a tired genre exercise found themselves struggling to process what they had actually witnessed. This wasn't a eulogy. This was a masterpiece. The first reviews began appearing the next day. "Eastwood has delivered the Western to end all Westerns," wrote one critic who had been skeptical before the screening. "A profound deconstruction of American mythology. The work of a filmmaker at the absolute peak of his powers. If this is Eastwood past his prime, then his prime was something we couldn't have imagined." The reviews were not universally positive. No film receives unanimous praise, but the overwhelming consensus was clear. Unforgiven was something special, something that transcended expectations. And everyone who read the reviews also remembered Thornton's article. The comparison was unavoidable. Past his prime. Final gasping breath. Should have retired years ago. Each positive review made Thornton's assessment look more foolish. Each critical analysis that praised Eastwood's direction and vision made Thornton's dismissal seem more reckless. The critic who had tried to bury Unforgiven before it could be seen was watching his prediction collapse in real time. Roger Thornton did not respond to the early reviews. He maintained his position. Films should be judged on their merits, and his assessment of the project's likely quality had been based on sound reasoning. Eastwood's previous directing efforts had been inconsistent. The Western genre was commercially dead. The premise of the film suggested self-indulgent nostalgia. But privately, Thornton was worried. He had built his career on being right. His influence depended on readers trusting his judgment. If Unforgiven succeeded, if audiences proved him wrong, his credibility would suffer. He considered options. He could write a retraction, admitting he had misjudged the film. But that would be seen as weakness, as capitulation to pressure. He could double down, insisting the positive reviews were overblown. But if the box office proved him wrong, he would look even more foolish. He could simply stay quiet, hoping the controversy would fade. He chose silence. It was the wrong choice. Unforgiven opened on August 7th, 1992. It opened in 2,071 theaters across the country, not the widest release, but respectable for a Western in an era when Westerns were considered box office poison. The studio braced for disappointment. The projections, influenced by Thornton's article and the general skepticism about the genre, suggested an opening weekend around $15 million. Acceptable, but not impressive. What actually happened exceeded everyone's expectations. Friday night numbers came in strong, stronger than anticipated. Saturday continued the momentum. By Sunday afternoon, the studio was recalculating their projections upward. When the final numbers were tallied, Unforgiven had earned over $15 million in its opening weekend, but that was just the beginning. The film had legs. Word of mouth was exceptional. Audiences who saw it told friends. Friends told family. The third weekend dropped less. By the time the theatrical run concluded, Unforgiven had earned over $100 million domestically, making it one of the highest-grossing Westerns in film history. A dead genre. A past his prime director, a film that should have been buried. The opening weekend had answered back. 2 months after the film's release, Roger Thornton attended a critics panel in New York. The moderator, a veteran journalist named Sarah Chen, had one question she couldn't resist asking. Roger, your article about Eastwood and Unforgiven has become somewhat famous in the intervening months. The film has been both a commercial and critical success. Do you have any thoughts on how your assessment compared to reality? I stand by the logic of my article. At the time I wrote it, the evidence suggested you hadn't seen the film when you wrote it. But a critic's job isn't only to evaluate finished products, it's to analyze trends, to predict outcomes based on available evidence. And the evidence led you to call Eastwood past his prime for a film that's now being discussed as one of the best westerns ever made. The film exceeded expectations. That doesn't mean my analysis was wrong, it means the outcome was surprising. So you're not wrong, you were just surprised? The audience laughed. Thornton's face darkened further. I think we should move on to other topics. But the damage was done. The exchange was reported widely. Thornton's refusal to acknowledge his error became the story, more damaging than the original article. Clint Eastwood was asked about Thornton's article in every interview he did. His response was always the same. I don't read reviews. You never saw his article? I saw the headline. Someone told me about the contents. And you didn't respond. What would responding accomplish? He had his opinion. I had my film. The audience would decide who was right. The audience decided pretty clearly. They did. But that's not really about me versus him. That's about the work. The work either connects with people or it doesn't. No amount of critical praise or criticism changes what the film actually is. So you don't feel vindicated? Clint shrugged. I feel grateful that people responded to the film. Beyond that, I don't spend much time thinking about it. You never thought about reaching out to Thornton, saying something to him directly? Why would I? He wrote what he believed. The film answered. That's a conversation that doesn't need my participation. Unforgiven didn't just succeed commercially. As award season approached, the film became a frontrunner in every major category. Critics organizations named it among the best of the year. Academy voters who had initially been skeptical found themselves impressed by repeat viewings. Nominations came in waves. Best Picture, Best Director, Best Supporting Actor for Gene Hackman, Best Original Screenplay, Best Film Editing, and each nomination reminded everyone of Thornton's prediction, a career that should have ended gracefully long ago. The final gasping breath, past his prime. The contrast between the prediction and the reality became impossible to ignore. When Unforgiven won Best Picture and Clint Eastwood won Best Director, the acceptance speech was notably humble. Clint thanked the cast, the crew, the studio. He said nothing about critics or doubters, but everyone watching knew the subtext. The man called past his prime had just won the highest honor in his industry. The opening weekend had answered back, and the Academy had confirmed the answer. Roger Thornton's career never recovered, not because he was blacklisted or punished. Nothing so dramatic. His career ended through something more insidious, irrelevance. Readers who had trusted his judgment began to question it. If he could be so wrong about Unforgiven, what else had he misjudged? How many films had he dismissed that deserved better? How many careers had he damaged with predictions based on logic rather than actual viewing? His column continued, but its influence waned. Studios that had once feared his reviews began ignoring them. Filmmakers who had courted his approval moved on to other critics. Within 5 years, Thornton had retired. His farewell column mentioned evolving tastes and new generations of critics. It didn't mention Unforgiven or Clint Eastwood, but everyone who read it understood what had really ended Roger Thornton's reign. A single article, a single catastrophic miscalculation. Years later, a documentary filmmaker tracked down Roger Thornton for an interview. He was living in Connecticut, retired, largely forgotten by the industry he had once dominated. Do you regret the Unforgiven article? Thornton was quiet for a long moment. I regret the certainty. I was certain I was right. That certainty led me to dismiss something without seeing it, to predict failure based on patterns rather than evidence. Did you ever watch the film? What did you think? I thought it was extraordinary. I thought it was one of the best westerns I had ever seen. I thought, he paused. I thought that I had been completely wrong, and that my wrongness had been public and permanent. Did you ever consider reaching out to Eastwood? Apologizing. What would that accomplish? He doesn't need my apology. The film's success is all the vindication he requires. My apology would just be for my own benefit. So, you never contacted him? Never. Do you have anything you'd want to say to him now, if he were watching? I'd tell him that he taught me something important, that confidence in your own judgment is valuable, but certainty is dangerous, that the willingness to wait, to let work speak for itself, is a kind of strength that critics rarely understand. Anything else? I'd tell him congratulations, not for the awards or the box office, for being right when everyone, including me, was certain he was wrong. Clint Eastwood's handling of the Thornton controversy became a case study in responding to criticism. Business schools discussed it. Public relations experts analyzed it. Film students studied the sequence of events. The principle was simple but difficult to execute. Let the work answer. Don't engage with critics who attack you before seeing your work. Don't defend yourself against predictions of failure. Don't waste energy on arguments that only legitimize the criticism. Just wait. Wait for the work to be judged on its merits. Wait for audiences to form their own opinions. Wait for time to reveal who was right and who was wrong. It required extraordinary confidence. Confidence that the work was good enough to overcome negative press. Confidence that audiences would respond to quality regardless of critical predictions. Not everyone could pull it off. But Clint Eastwood did. A critic called Clint Eastwood past his prime. The opening weekend answered back. But the real lesson wasn't about vindication or revenge, or proving doubters wrong. The real lesson was about focus. Clint Eastwood could have spent months fighting Thornton's article. He could have done interviews defending himself. He could have engaged in a public war of words that would have consumed his attention and energy. Instead, he focused on what mattered, the film. He trusted that the work he had done, the years of development, the careful casting, the deliberate direction, would speak louder than any critic's prediction. He was right. The film spoke. The audiences listened. The box office responded. The awards followed, and Roger Thornton became a cautionary tale about the dangers of certainty. The opening weekend numbers told one story. The long-term success told another. But the real answer came in the decades that followed. Unforgiven is now considered one of the greatest westerns ever made. It appears on virtually every list of essential American films. Film schools use it to teach directing, screenwriting, cinematography. Clint Eastwood continued directing well into his 90s, proving that past his prime is a meaningless phrase when applied to someone who refuses to accept limitations. Roger Thornton's article is remembered as one of the great critical failures in film history, proof that predictions based on patterns rather than actual viewing are worthless. And the lesson endures. When someone calls you finished, you don't need to argue. When someone predicts your failure, you don't need to respond. When the world tells you that your best days are behind you, you don't need to defend yourself. You just need to keep working. Keep creating. Keep trusting that the work will answer. A critic called Clint Eastwood past his prime. And the answer was $100 million, 2 Academy Awards, and a permanent place in American cinema history. That's the only answer that matters.